Well, would you look at that? Canonet QL17, more specifically the Canonet QL17 G3. Well-known, beautiful, sexy little rangefinder. A good friend of mine sent me this to mainly change out the light seals. As you probably saw in my other videos, that's a big problem with older vintage, especially older vintage 35mm cameras. And it's especially tricky, not difficult, but tricky on the Canonet QL17 G3 and a few other of the Canonet cameras because of the way the light seal system is actually set up. So we're going to replace the light seals on this beautiful girl with my permanent setup in the door. Really everything else on the camera is in excellent shape, especially the lens. These are actually prone to being easily scratched because the coating is very fragile on them, but this one seems to be okay. Of course, we're going to do the seals and then clean everything up. The only thing that I have noticed, it's really not a big deal depending on how you use the camera, the little battery checker button right here is actually missing. Now you can still stick a toothpick or something in there to check it. Like I said, I don't have any of those actually laying around. We'll just see. But primarily, we're going to get in here, check out the cameras, light seals, clean all that up, replace them with some permanent ones, and then this little beauty should be good to go. All right, to kick things off here, as always, I have, of course, put a little piece of painter's tape right here over the area of the shutter, just a tiny piece to keep any of this junk from the foam seals falling down in there any more than it already is. Plus, I don't want to drop any of this isopropyl alcohol down on that, I think I mentioned it before, that admittedly fairly fragile coating on these Canonet lenses. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Canonet seals, they're not difficult to change out by any means, but they're a little different, a little more quirky than some other 35mm camera seals. And that's because it does have a top little runner seal up here that we're going to replace with a yarn, but all the other seals are actually located in the door, and the door, it's removable, but it's not easily removable. You have a you have a foam seal right here at the latch, one big foam seal at the bottom, a smaller one here at the top of the door, and as usually happens, the Canonet has a felt seal right here on the body of the camera where the door articulates. We won't actually be replacing that because since it's felt, it's actually fine. You can see what I mean about the bottom of the Canonets. This little lip here, the door actually fits over the bottom of the camera. And that's how it seals itself, even though the seal itself is located in the door. So that leaves us with a lot of this sticky gunk here on the camera body as well as inside the door. So yeah, we've got to clean all that out. We're going to get started with our trusty 99% isopropyl alcohol and standard issue Q-tip. I'm just going to saturate all this old foam and then scrape it out. Now while the alcohol is doing its work, helping to dissolve some of that old adhesive, I want to mention that when using your Q-tips, it can sometimes be helpful. I think I'm actually okay here, but it can sometimes be helpful to kind of squish down, flatten the end of your Q-tips to help it get down in these channels. So I believe we're okay here because I'm just able to let that kind of flow down. But if you watch some other videos replacing the seals on namely that Nikon F3 35mm and then probably that Electro 35, which is sort of a similar camera to this, it can really help to get down in those crevices to flatten out your Q-tips. Now when it comes to actually cleaning off all this foam junk and old glue, you don't have to really overcomplicate it. Generally I use a little burnout stick from a stick of incense to get down in these little channels. With this one, especially on the body of the camera, we should be able to just wipe that off, yeah, fairly easily. Now that it's been saturated with that alcohol, I have to make one or two swipes on it. But yeah, that's coming off pretty well. So I'm going to go through, scrape out all these old seals from the body and from the door here, and then we'll get ready to replace the channel seals with our yarn, and then the door seals that are actually attached to the inside of the door, we'll be putting our cotton felt onto those. And since I have them, I'm going to use them. I'm having some stubborn foam kind of right here in these little crevices. So really carefully, I'm going to use this little cheap dental tool that I love to scrape off all that nasty stuff without damaging the finish of the camera. Yeah, just look at that. That is no bueno. Yeah, nobody needs that in their life. So that is about gotten off as much as we can from the body of the camera. I've cleaned out that top track as well. Let's move on to the door. This poor girl is just absolutely horrific with that foam. It's the first one I've saw where it's actually eating the paint. I don't know what kind of adhesive they were using in these seals, but it's actually dissolved the paint in a few spots. Luckily the felt will cover all that up. But yeah, still kind of crazy. And our last seal to go here will be right under this little secondary pressure plate. That's the last foam one I can see in the back of the door. So I'm going to clean that out, and then we'll break out our felt and we'll be replacing these. All right, I believe that is about as good as we can get as far as cleanliness. Now you can see there's a lot of this old foam laying around here. There's a lot in the camera, so I'm not going to actually use any air right here with a little rocket blower. I'm going to just go off camera, blow this thing out, help to evaporate some of that alcohol too. And then let's clean up the work area before we actually start on the seals, yeah? Okay, so actually replacing the light seals on this camera, or really any other, using my little permanent method here, is extremely straightforward. All you need, some 100% cotton yarn. Now if you watch the other videos, the only reason I use this, I'm not a yarn expert, the only reason I use this is because that's what I've always heard to use, and it seemed to work okay so far. So the yarn, and some self-adhering cotton felt. Now you will notice I've put links to all this stuff, guys, down in the description, but you can probably 99.9% of the time find all this stuff locally, and I would suggest that be what you do. But for whatever reason, you live in a place where you absolutely cannot get to a store, or you don't have yarn or felt, you can get it off of Amazon. Now, since it's probably going to be the most complicated, again, not difficult, but the most complicated part of it, I'm going to do the felt seals first. This one here at the bottom of the door, all I'm going to do is cut out a length of our felt here, and then gently fit that in that little track at the bottom. We're going to do the same thing at the top, even though it's going to be a little bit smaller, probably a little bit more finicky. And then we're going to finish up with this one that's right here behind that pressure plate. Probably have to hold that back a little bit. We'll just see. So yeah, it's all going to be a matter of just kind of roughly measuring, cutting the felt, and then sticking the felt into the tracks. Now I want to take just a second to mention that you can, of course, buy replacement seal sets for virtually any camera these days that are foam, and they're already custom made to fit in there. They're really not that expensive, but eventually you will have to replace those again. It might not be you, maybe another generation, but with these, for all intents and purposes, they should last for the entire life of the camera. Just roughly measuring out where our seal is going to need to begin and end. Always better to leave a little excess than to cut off more than you need, because you can't always trim off the felt, but you can't add any more to it. pretty good. Sharper tip scissors the better. Of course, mine are just some old dull ones, but we make do. All right, we have our felt. I'm going to start peeling off the backing. There we go. Now you can actually put a little bit of water on the back of this felt, and then that actually disengages the adhesive just a little bit. It makes it easier to lay it in there. I hardly ever do that, folks. One, because it takes a while to dry, and then secondly, I'm just extremely lazy. There we go. Begin that carefully. Where's my tool? All right. And then we're just going to gingerly tap that in as we go, trying to keep it as straight as possible. We'll just remove that backing. It should fit right in there like so. You do have a little wiggle room should you get off track, but just try to fix it.
I'm not sure about that.
Alexa talking to me.
Right now, it's who I'm talking to.
All right. Maybe a little tricky getting past that battery, not the battery, but that secondary pressure plate. And there we are. Make sure it's seated well enough in there. Beautiful. And then we have just the tiniest of tiny overhangs on the lip, and we'll trim that off. And there we go. One seal down. I'm going to do essentially the same exact thing to the top of the door and here at the side, and then we'll be ready to do the yarn at the very top channel seal there on the body. Something I want to mention to you, should you be trying to replace the seals on your Canonet yourself, this little secondary pressure plate I was mentioning, it might help you to put a small screwdriver or toothpick in there and gently, not very far, you don't want to actually bend it, but just bend that back up a little bit so that your felt can be slid down in there just a little bit easier. So yeah, I probably could have used another 5 or 6 pairs of hands on that. Mainly just because of this pressure plate. But success. All right, so let's finish up with the top of the door seal. Now, if this was actually my camera, I would like to have experimented with actually using some adhesive with our yarn up top here, because this little tiny track, it's just begging to have some yarn in it, but there's nothing to really hold it in place with friction like it is on the top channel. So yeah, if I ever get a Canonet, we'll test out on putting some yarn on the door here. Yarn fits down in there like so. For being honest, of course we are, this seal seems to be a little overkill since we have this one on the door already, but it did have some old foam seal down in the track, so I assume at one time it had its own little seal there. So yeah, we're going to replace it too. Whoops. just like with the felt, cut a little bit more than we needed. And now that I've reached that button, the frame recount button, I'm going to just trim off our piece. Bring this all the way up to the button. Pretty good cut job. And then we'll just take our remainder and begin it on the other side of the frame recount button, frame reset button. And just bring that out to the edge. Snippity snip. Make certain that gets seated into the track so the door is not going to snag on it. And the more you actuate the door, the more that this yarn is going to get seated in there really, really well. Perfect. No more door rattle. Frame recount works. Oh yeah, nice and snug. So that is a permanent set of seals on the Canonet QL17 G3. Now it's a little snug. Again, the more you use it, that should be perfect here in just another few closes of the door. So we have got that in there. I'm going to take the tape off, blow everything out, clean everything out, go over the outside, make sure everything's spick and span, and we're going to be finished.